This is Jacob Friedman.
You might look at the headlines today and see a standard diplomatic itinerary. The Prime Minister is heading to British Columbia, chatting with First Nations leaders, and then taking a long flight to Beijing to shake hands and talk tariffs. On the surface, it looks like routine statecraft, a leader doing the rounds, managing trade disputes, and trying to smooth over some rocky history. But if you stop there, if you treat this as just another foreign trip or a desperate attempt to sell more canola oil, you are missing the tectonic shift happening right underneath our feet. This isn't just a trade mission, it is a declaration of independence. For decades, the Canadian economic strategy has been simple: look south. We rely on the United States for the vast majority of our trade, our investment, and our economic security. But the world is changing. The American political landscape is fracturing, becoming more protectionist, more volatile, and frankly, more hostile to its traditional allies. And right now, in real time, we are watching Canada make a calculated high-stakes pivot. The title of this story mentions Mark Carney, and that is not an accident. While the cameras are focused on the Prime Minister, the broader strategy here, the push to bring Chinese private sector investment into Canada, signals a profound realization in Ottawa. We can no longer afford to put all our eggs in the American basket. This is the story of a middle power realizing that to survive the 21st century, it needs to play the field, and it needs to do it now. Let's be honest about what it feels like to watch the news these days. You see these clips of politicians boarding planes or giving stiff press conferences, and it all feels very distant. You hear phrases like diversifying trade or bilateral relations, and your eyes glaze over. It feels like bureaucratic noise. But I want you to understand the stakes here. This isn't about bureaucrats shuffling papers. This is about the future of your job, the cost of your groceries, and the stability of the economy you live in. When we talk about Canada diversifying away from the United States, as officials are now openly admitting on background, we are talking about a fundamental rewiring of the Canadian engine. It's the realization that the old safety net, Uncle Sam, is fraying. So when you see the Prime Minister heading to China, don't just see a diplomatic visit. See a country trying to build a lifeboat before the storm south of the border gets any worse. You watched the news, you saw the handshake photos, but you didn't see the full map of what is actually being negotiated. I'm going to walk you through it. Here is what is officially happening, the surface level story that the networks are reporting. The Prime Minister is starting his trip in British Columbia. He's meeting with coastal First Nations in the Prince Rupert region. This is strategic territory. It's home to major energy projects, including LNG, liquefied natural gas, and there is talk of pipelines from Alberta to the coast. The official narrative is that he is there to discuss major projects and listen to concerns about the environment and the impact on coastal waters. From there, he flies to China. The itinerary is packed: meetings with business leaders, CEOs, the Premier, and finally, President Xi Jinping. The official line from Canadian officials speaking on background is that this is about reviving the relationship. They are admitting quite candidly that things have been icy. We all remember the tension. The detention of the Huawei CEO, the imprisonment of the Michaels. It was a dark period. But now the message is re-engagement. They want stability. They want a path forward. Specifically, they are looking to lower tariffs on Canadian agriculture, particularly canola, which has been hit hard. And they are looking for investment, cash from the Chinese private sector flowing into Canadian industries. That is the story you will read in the morning paper. It's neat, it's tidy, and it makes sense. But here is why that surface story is woefully incomplete. It treats this trip as an isolated attempt to fix a specific problem like the canola tariffs. It frames the visit as a reset after a diplomatic spat, but that ignores the massive geopolitical context that is driving this. You cannot understand this trip without looking at the United States. This isn't just about Canada and China making up. This is about Canada looking at the United States and getting nervous. The officials didn't just say they want to increase trade with China. They explicitly said the goal is to diversify away from the United States. That is a stunning admission. Usually diplomats are more subtle. They talk about expanding markets, but to say diversify away is to acknowledge a vulnerability. It suggests that the Canadian government and strategic thinkers like Mark Carney, who are influential in these economic circles, see the American market not just as an opportunity, but as a risk. They are looking at the potential for 10% or 20% tariffs from a future U.S. administration. They are looking at the instability of American trade policy, and they are deciding that Canada needs an insurance policy. Bringing Chinese private equity and private investment into Canada isn't just about money, it's about leverage. It's about creating a counterweight so that when Washington threatens to squeeze the Canadian economy, Ottawa has somewhere else to turn. To understand the system behind this, we have to look at the broader ideological shift. For a long time, the Western consensus was that we should integrate our economies with fellow democracies and be wary of state-led economies like China. But that consensus is breaking down, not because we want it to, but because the reliability of the democratic superpower next door is in question. The Carney doctrine, if we can call it that, has always been about pragmatic resilience. It's about looking at the balance sheet of the nation and seeing where the exposure is too high. Right now, Canada's exposure to U.S. political risk is off the charts. So the move to court Chinese investment is a return to a kind of realpolitik. It's a recognition that capital has no nationality. And if American capital comes with political strings or the threat of sudden withdrawal, then Chinese capital, even with its own complexities, becomes a necessary diversification. We are seeing a shift from values-based trade, which was the buzzword for years, back to interest-based trade. The government is effectively saying, we might not agree on everything, but we need to do business because our traditional business partner is becoming unpredictable. This brings us to the question of who benefits and who pays. This is where the rubber meets the road. Who gains power from this pivot? Primarily, it's the resource sector and the major financial institutions in Canada. The energy projects in northern BC, the LNG terminals, the pipeline proposals, these require massive amounts of capital. If American investors are hesitant, or if the U.S. government is putting up roadblocks, Chinese private investment can fill that gap. The beneficiaries are the corporate elites who need liquidity to get these mega projects off the ground. It also benefits the agricultural sector, the canola farmers in Saskatchewan who have been bleeding money due to tariffs. We know Scott Moe, the Premier of Saskatchewan, is expected to join some of these conversations. He's currently on vacation in the region, but he's making time for this. Why? Because his province is taking a beating. 100% tariff on canola is devastating. For him and for the farmers he represents, this isn't about geopolitics. It's about survival. They need those markets open. But who pays? Who loses status or security? That is the question we need to ask. When you invite massive foreign investment from a strategic rival into your critical infrastructure, your energy grid, your resource extraction, you are opening the door to influence. The people who pay might be those concerned with national security or those worried about the environmental standards that often get sidelined when the priority shifts to desperate economic growth. And of course, there is the risk to the average citizen who might find that the decisions about their local economy are increasingly being made in boardrooms in Beijing rather than Toronto or New York. Let's use some simple concrete examples to show what this looks like in real life. Imagine you are a farmer in Saskatchewan. For years, you grew canola, put it on a train, and sold it to China. It was a good living. Then politics happened. The relationship soured, tariffs were slapped on, and suddenly your crop is sitting in a silo, losing value every day. You don't care about the grand chessboard. You just want to sell your grain. For you, this trip is a lifeline. If the Prime Minister and Scott Moe can get those tariffs lifted, it means you can pay your mortgage next year. On the flip side, imagine you live in a coastal community in British Columbia. You are watching these massive LNG projects being built. You hear about private sector investment, and it sounds abstract. But what it actually means is that a foreign entity now owns a stake in the land and the resources in your backyard. It means that the pressure to build that pipeline, the one the coastal First Nations have been pushing back against, might intensify because now there is fresh capital behind it demanding a return on investment. The officials mentioned that the PM is talking to First Nations about major projects and that there is pushback regarding the pipeline's effect on the pristine oceans. If Chinese investment comes in, that pushback faces a new, well-funded opponent. The pipeline from Alberta to the BC coast isn't just a line on a map. It's a flashpoint for local control versus international capital. This is where we have to look at how democratic norms can be quietly eroded, not by a sudden coup, but by the slow grinding pressure of economic necessity. The source material highlights that the Prime Minister is in British Columbia specifically to talk to coastal First Nations about major projects and pipelines. We are told there has been a lot of pushback from these groups. They are worried about their pristine oceans. They are worried about the risks of transporting bitumen to the coast. These are valid democratic expressions of local sovereignty. But now introduce the element of Chinese private sector investment when you bring in global capital that is hungry for returns and perhaps less sensitive to local environmental nuances than domestic funding might be, the equation changes. The pressure on those First Nations leaders to say yes becomes astronomical. It is no longer just a negotiation with Ottawa, it is a negotiation with the global market. The government's desperate need to diversify means they need these projects to work. They need the LNG terminals in Prince Rupert to be operational so they can sell to Asia. And if local democratic resistance, the blowback the reporter mentioned, stands in the way of a national economic pivot, history tells us that the local voices are the ones that get steamrolled. We are watching a scenario where the rights of Indigenous communities could be pitted against the national interest of decoupling from the American economy. How does this affect ordinary people? Let's translate this abstract diversification talk into your daily reality. You might not be a canola farmer or an LNG worker, but this shift touches you. It affects the integrity of your information ecosystem and your privacy. We know that the private sector in China does not operate with the same independence as companies in the West. The line between the state and the corporation is blurry at best. If we are actively courting this investment into Canadian sectors, we are inviting entities that may ultimately answer to Beijing into the heart of our economy. This impacts everything from the technology you use to the security of the infrastructure that heats your home. It's a trade-off. We might get cheaper goods or more jobs in the short term, but we are importing a security vulnerability that could compromise our civil liberties down the road. It also affects the moral clarity of our country. When we tie our economic well-being to a regime that we have previously condemned for human rights abuses, remember, officials admit the relationship was icy due to the detention of the Michaels, we are subtly agreeing to look the other way. The stability, the officials say, they are seeking often comes at the price of our voice. For the average citizen, it means living in a country that might be richer in cash, but poorer in principle. And yet, look at how the media frames this. The reporting is breathless and procedural. We hear about the packed agenda, the pit stop in BC, and the very, very long flight. We get details about who is sitting where and which handshake happened when. The reporter tells us that officials are speaking on background about reviving the relationship as if it were a rekindled romance. They frame it as a success story. Look, they are talking again. Progress on tariffs. This is the failure of mainstream framing. It focuses on the diplomatic theater, the mechanics of the trip, rather than the existential question at the core. They treat the diversification away from the United States as just a logical business move, a simple portfolio adjustment. They fail to ask why we are in a position where we have to run into the arms of a strategic rival to survive. They don't rigorously question what concessions are being made in the dark to get those tariffs lifted. We hear that they don't expect to see these tariffs removed entirely, but we aren't told what the quid pro quo is for the progress they do expect. The media presents both sides. The government wants trade, the critics worry about human rights, as equal and opposite viewpoints to be balanced, rather than digging into the reality that one side is reshaping the geopolitical orientation of the country without a full public debate. There are missing questions here that the public is not encouraged to ask. We should be asking, if we bring in Chinese private sector investment, what sectors are off limits? Are we allowing investment in our tech sector, our critical minerals, our housing market? The briefing mentioned Canadian sectors generally, but the devil is in the details. We should be asking about the leverage this gives China over our future political decisions. If a future Canadian government wants to take a stand on Taiwan or Hong Kong, will they be silenced by the threat of capital flight from these new private sector partners? And we should be asking about the United States. Is this pivot a bluff to get Washington's attention, or is it a permanent realignment? The officials said they are trying to diversify away from the U.S. Is that a temporary hedge or a long-term divorce? These are the questions that determine the future of the nation, yet we are busy talking about flight times and vacationing premiers. The bigger lesson here connects to the deeper logic of the current political moment. We are living in an era of fracturing alliances. Now, the post-World War II order, where Canada could quietly prosper under the American security and economic umbrella, is over. That umbrella is leaking. This trip is a symptom of a world where friend shoring, trading only with allies, is proving too expensive or too risky for a country like Canada. We are seeing the return of a messy transactional world where values are secondary to survival. It highlights the fragility of our democratic systems when faced with economic coercion. We are vulnerable to the U.S. because they are too big, and we are vulnerable to China because they are too rich. We are caught in the middle, and our leaders are scrambling to find a foothold. This isn't just about selling canola. It's about the terrifying reality of being a small fish in a tank with two sharks that don't like each other. The culture wars we fight at home about gender, about language, about history often distract us from this massive structural vulnerability. While we argue about pronouns, the fundamental economic architecture of our country is being renegotiated in Beijing. This is not an accident. It is the calculated result of a specific worldview that views nations not as homes to be protected, but as economic zones to be managed. The architects of this strategy, the people advising the prime minister, the thinkers like Mark Carney, operate on a level of abstraction where sovereignty is just another variable to be traded for efficiency. They look at the map and see flows of capital, not communities of people. And when you view the world that way, swapping American dependence for Chinese investment makes perfect rational sense on a spreadsheet. It diversifies the portfolio. It hedges the risk. But nations are not hedge funds. You cannot manage a country's soul like you manage an asset class. The decision to open the doors to Chinese private equity is a decision to embed a rival system into our own, to invite a fox into the henhouse because the dog we used to rely on has become unpredictable. It is a strategy born of weakness, not strength, and it reveals a terrifying lack of imagination among our leadership. They cannot conceive of a Canada that stands on its own, that builds its own industrial capacity, that strengthens its internal resilience. They can only imagine a Canada that depends on someone, if not Washington, then Beijing. So as the Prime Minister shakes hands in Beijing and the press releases tout new opportunities and constructive dialogue, I want you to feel the gravity of this moment. We are watching the end of an era and the messy, dangerous beginning of a new one. The stability we took for granted is gone. We are entering a period where our government will ask us to accept things that were previously unthinkable. Foreign control over key resources, silence on human rights abuses, the erosion of local democratic wishes, all in the name of economic survival. They will tell you it is necessary. They will tell you it is the only way to keep the lights on and the grocery shelves stocked. And because the alternative is frightening, many will agree, but we must not agree blindly. We must not let the technical language of investment and tariffs mask the profound political surrender taking place. What should we take away from this? We need to watch the details. Don't just read the headlines about the trip. Look for the announcements 3 months from now. Watch for the quiet approval of a Chinese takeover of a mining company in Northern Ontario. Watch for the sudden silencing of a cabinet minister who used to be vocal about human rights. Watch for the partnerships announced at universities that come with funding strings attached. These are the silent aftershocks of the earthquake happening right now. We need to question every single major project that gets fast-tracked after this trip. Who is funding it? Who owns the debt? And what leverage does that ownership grant them over our decisions in a crisis? This is the reality of the world we are building. It is a world where Canada is no longer a partner to the West, but a broker between empires, selling pieces of itself to stay afloat. It is a precarious, lonely place to be. We are drifting away from the shore we knew, paddling toward a horizon that is dark and uncertain. Do we want to be a country that stands for something or a country that will sell anything? Is our sovereignty for sale to the highest bidder just to avoid the hard work of building true independence? Think about that the next time you see a politician smiling on a tarmac. And if you want to keep peeling back the layers of these stories that the mainstream media glosses over, if you want to understand the mechanics of power that are actually shaping your life, make sure you are subscribed. Leave a comment below. Do you think diversifying into China is a smart insurance policy or a dangerous trap? I read your comments and I want to know where you stand. Like this video to help others find it, and stay with us. We're going to keep watching, even when they want us to look away. This is Jacob Friedman signing off.